Alistair, thanks so much for jumping on this call.
No problem, Tom. Never a short. No, a double. What's new in the world of BBC Three? Needing to get my kit off?
Well, we've actually got this live passing parade special coming up on Friday that we think screams Alistair Fergus. There's this big dig happening in Wiltshire.
Friday's tricky, Tom. I've got tickets for Twickers. What's the juice? Fracking in the Shires? Local Lib Dems revolting?
No, it's more of an archaeological type of thing.
Archaeology. I told you about bringing me Tony Robinson's sloppy seconds. Is the hardware good? Fleet of diggers, tunnel borers.
So far, it's an old boy with a trowel, but there is a paranormal angle to it.
Now we're talking. A coven of nubile young witches dancing naked in the flames. Britt Eklund slapping the vine. That'll get them switching over from the rugby.
Apparently there is a witch. More of a Prue Leith type, though.
I don't know, Tom. It's not really crisping the cucumber. Remember when we did the robots outside St Paul's? That was news.
You turned that down too. You described it as, hang on, I've still got the email, sub-tomorrow's world filler that even Howard Stableford wouldn't zip his chinos for.
I think I'm out, Tom. Can you rope in one of your other BBC Three bods? Danny Dyer, Stacey Dooley, Peter Purvis. Call me when you've got a nice embassy siege or something.
Listen, Alistair, there's a cracking pub in the village. We'll overnight you there. Everything's on expenses.
Deal, Noel. See you in Devil's End, Tom.
Oh, phew. Chris, can you get me Gemma Collins' number? She says yes to this Axons in Magaluf idea. I'm knocking off early.
Ready when you are.
Rocks and a parish flock, all on this week's magical instalment of I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that's hot but still passable, with your hosts John West
and Matt Needer. On tonight's programme, everyone's glued to BBC Three in the hope of seeing a good hump while the third Doctor beats Elon Musk to the self-driving car by 53 years and counting. We raise a pint to the age of Aquarius and summon the Daemons.
Well, hello, Matt.
Hello, John. How you doing?
I'm good.
Excellent. Ready to talk more Doctor Who?
I am. Keen-eyed viewers, because we are on the YouTubes as well, or the used tube, sorry. Attorneys General, Gins and Tonic, used tube. We are on the used tube. And
do you think I should be putting this on Daily Motion too? Do you think there's a big market there?
Well, there's certainly a big Doctor Who audience.
Large quantities of Doctor Who.
I don't want that to be taken down, so we probably shouldn't reference it. But yes, hello to the viewers, both of you. Two listeners, one viewer. Hello to the viewer. And we're here for another episode of another instalment of I'll Explain Later. What's on tonight's programme?
Tonight we are looking at, again, I think one of the big classics of Doctor Who.
Absolutely.
We are talking the Daemons,
Or the Demons.
Or the Demons, yes.
And just to be clear, either is perfectly acceptable because they can't even decide within the serial how to pronounce it.
Well, I go by... There's the scene where Pertwee says, they're Daemons from the planet Deimos.
Exactly.
Daemons. He really emphasises the Mons as well. They're Daemons from the planet Deimos. So I'm saying Daemons. Will no doubt slip into saying demons at various points. But anyway, it's the season finale of Series 8, the second John Pertwee season. John, when did I've already said 71, haven't I? But be more specific.
Yeah, no, I mean...
days and months.
Absolutely. So it ran from the 22nd of May to the 19th of June, 1971.
Yep.
And is, I think, a quite rare five-parter.
Yeah. Not many of those.
Gotta say, it was a real shot in the arm when I realised episode 5 was...
I had exactly that moment.
Wow.
It's taking a while to wrap this up. Oh,
Wow. Yeah.
Oh.
So, and I don't say that to preempt a diatribe against this, but just, it's generally the case that 6 and indeed 7 parters can, to the modern eye, just drag on a little bit.
So it'd be interesting.
They can.
It'd be interesting to see whether a 5-parter bucks that trend.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, what happens in the Daemons?
Well, so there's going to be an archaeological dig, and there is a lot of concern that this will...
and this is a live archaeological dig happening on BBC Three. This is the Talk About Television event of...
That's right.
Was it the rugby?
Yeah, and bearing in mind that I think BBC Three is what? BBC Three is actually, 25 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
So just in case, and we're getting to that point now where we have to say this, there was no BBC Three in 1971.
Well, there hadn't been much BBC Two either at that point, had there?
A couple of years, a few years. But anyway, so the idea of BBC Three made it seem impossibly futuristic. I guess what they're saying is that this was in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Not clear.
Some point in the indeterminate future. But go on. Anyway, there's an archaeological dig.
There is, and it's being televised, so it's clearly very important and very exciting. And there's some local concern, particularly from a self-declared white witch, Miss Hawthorne, that they're going to unleash the forces of Beelzebub himself. Yep. Got there in the end. And there's concern that dark magic is going to be released with the burrowing into this barrow.
Yeah.
And alongside that, there is a coven or cabal of hooded weirdos in the crypt of the local church who seem to be also summoning dark forces, led by a very charming new vicar,
Reverend Magister,
who this being season 8, the master season, obviously is the master, and quite uncharacteristically, the Doctor, who is in the Pertwee formulation, very sort of H.G. Wells professor, kind of scientific, rational kind of beast, gets wind of this and hears the concern about the archaeological dig and seems to be also quite animated to stop it from happening, leading Joe to be quite, because Joe Grant, of course, is the companion in this one, to be quite sort of flustered, like that he is believing in black magic, and actually it's all a bit more complicated than that. And then, of course, the dig does unleash something, and is it the devil, or is it an alien, or is it both?
Yeah.
And all that sort of stuff. And it's set in a
Devil's
End, a quintessentially English sort of Cotswoldsy kind of home counties-y kind of village. Very heavily folk horror, Hammer coded, I suppose you could say. And fair to say, I suppose, Matt, something of a fan favourite.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm not sure whether that's... I haven't really tracked its sort of stock over the years in where it sits. I mean, for a long time, it only existed in black and white, but was then given a sort of at the time, extremely cutting-edge colorization in 1992 in order to get it out on video. And, it's been re-colorized and restored a bunch of times since. I mean, I think from where we're sitting now, very much considered a classic, although not as universally perhaps as some others in the Pertwee era, but whether we agree or not, I'm sure we'll get onto. You complained last time because I always throw to you at this point to give your opinion first. So I'm instead going to invite you to choose which one of us gives our opinion first.
I'm going to. Okay. I'm going to.
Shoot. And do you like the Daemons?
I absolutely love it.
Right.
I think, and this is terribly tedious for either of the listeners.
Who saw it coming?
This is terribly tedious for either of the listeners who are aware of just how much we enjoyed this run of Doctor Who. The Unit family, the third Doctor tinkering away at stuff.
Yeah.
The sheer volume of cash that's thrown at the screen. I mean, they burn vans. There's an archaeological dig. There's
I was going to say, the pyros, the explosions.
They're shooting stuff. They get through pyros like nobody's business. That heat shield, they're constantly shoving sticks into it. And it all looks pretty good, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like you don't bump on it.
The church explodes at the end.
I know, right? And there's even like a blink and you'll miss it, model shot of the collapsed church.
Yeah.
Now, they don't want you to focus on it because it's obviously shonky enough that it wouldn't stand out. But there's the split second to give you the sense that that's happened. It's just smart. It's a smart decision to do that. It's great. This is beautifully directed by Christopher Barry, beautifully directed. The art direction is fantastic. All of the little, especially the crypt and the tiling and all the rest of the pub, the interior of the, it's the Cloven Hoof, isn't it? The pub,
sort of stone-walled.
The characterization of the kind of twitched neck curtains, parochial Brit who, Britain, the foundation myth of modern Britain is the Second World War.
Yeah.
We stood alone against the Nazis, right?
Yeah.
And we stood on the cliffs of Dover and said, right, this far and no further, Jerry. Mm-hmm. That's the foundation myth of modern Britain. So much so that you get, boomers who weren't even born when the Second World War was taking place,
lecturing younger people about World War II.
And sort of paying thousands of pounds in weekly 50 quid installments for a clock plate of Spitfires flying over Buckingham Palace or something, right? These are those people, or people like them. They're the kind of people who would think to themselves, we stood against Nazism. And what this does is say, you know what? They're not so very far away from being led down that path of fascism themselves. And that's a large, but it's not all, because there's a huge amount of escapism and folk horror and pyro and just great fun and great visuals and leaping about and motorbikes and helicopters and all the action and John Pertwee just being fantastic and the Brigadier being extremely funny.
Yeah, Brigadier is really funny.
All of that is there. Roger Delgado just being appropriately magisterial. And just like he's outstanding in this. Probably his best turn actually as the Master.
He's incredible in this.
But there's all of that. And also there's There But For the Grace of God, chilling little parable about how close all of us are to, or how close a society can get to fascism with just a few small wrong turns. Brilliant stuff. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Matt?
Okay. No. Well, I want to pay. We're gonna have some fun with this, I think, because I say that. Don't want to say that now and then obviously curts it to being a tedious and dull episode. I agree. I agree. I love this. I think I sort of want to unpack that sort of social component that you've picked on a bit, because to me that was, I mean, I think the villages are very well drawn, but to me the sort of the meat of the story is looking elsewhere, and I think it's looking in some super interesting places, which I will get to. But just to sort of kick off, I absolutely love this. I don't think it's as unqualified a success as some of the other Pertwee stories that we've covered recently.
I would agree. I absolutely agree.
I personally think, just to round out our discussion at the top, that it should be 4 episodes. 5 is too many. I think it spins its wheels at various points during episode 4, and then sort of weirdly rushes its denouement as well.
Yeah, it's very strange that, and I would agree with the pacing there. That there are one too many villager fisticuffs with either Yates or Benton just as kind of filler.
Thing. I mean, once it lays out its pieces, not a huge amount happens, and there's a bit of a rush to wrap it up, right? So on a technical level, I think there is more accomplished stuff elsewhere in the Pertwee era.
I also think if you're going to have a slower thing, then what you need is a bit, and this is something that, for example, without wishing to sound like a fanboy, this is the kind of thing that Russell T Davies is very good at. Like, this is a bit of a quiet patch in the episode.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll have a really strong character beat.
Yeah.
Like the kind of thing you get, is in Tomb of the Cybermen, which I, by the way, don't really rate very much, but it's got the famous scene with the Doctor talking about
remembering his family and talking about
Victoria.
grief to Victoria.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that a writer does when they need 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But a good writer will give you that, and that you.
But equally, I would say this is not short of decent character moments. For sort of all the regulars.
But there are some moments where they're in the pub, which just feels like the most appropriately British place for them to have some of that character work, and it doesn't necessarily yield as much as you might hope.
Yeah.
But go on. Sorry, you were.
Well, so this is a co-write between Barry Letts and Robert Sloman under the pen name of Guy Leopold.
That's right.
Which I think was a combination of their various sort of kids' names or middle names or something like that. Robert Sloman's first appearance writing for the show. He does all of the sort of series finales during the Pertwee era in collaboration or not in collaboration with Barry Letts. But similar to last year we reviewed The Green Death and fair to say sung its praises.
Yeah,
and
I mean I would say this is gold. That's platinum. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. But what that does, I mean, that's 2 years further down the line from this, and it's also just as a little side note, we're thinking that Doctor Who at this point is very much doing series finales. This is a bigger story at the end of the run that feels like it's a culmination of sort of themes and ideas. The Green Death, I think, is doing something else, but this is a sort of dry run for the sort of story that they will really nail with The Green Death, which is to locate Doctor Who in the counterculture and in sort of also various social things that are going on at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So this, and as you said, is like very much in the world of folk horror, that sort of hammer horror thing going on. Something that maybe we associate a little more with the 60s and the 70s, but again, as a nice little marker, 1971, you really sort of, the long 60s is still going on here, really. That sort of counterculture, like the fact that Joe's first line, for example, is, but it really is the dawning at the age of Aquarius, which is like sort of peak Joe Grant, but is very much something that we sort of think of more as late 60s than early 70s.
Yeah, but at the same time, I found myself thinking, wow, this is 2 years before The Wicker Man.
Yes, absolutely. So there's definitely something in the water, which we'll get to. I think this also plays incredibly well now because we are now also in an era where, it's not as much of a mainstream preoccupation as it might have been in the late 60s, early 70s, but there's been a sort of surge of interest in, British folklore, the supernatural, since the pandemic. Sales of tarot cards and tarot readings have sort of gone through the roof. I'm a fairly avid reader of I think the excellent zine Weird Walk, which kind of covers a lot of this territory. I think did actually do a piece on the Daemons a couple of issues ago. Ironically, BBC Three has just broadcast a very good series with Charlie Cooper from This Country about all of this kind of stuff, like the myths and legends of Britain. So there's all of that going on, and a lot of that plays, I think, very sympathetically in 2024 if you've got sort of ear to the ground on what's going on now. But I also like just how we've always praised the Pertwee era for how it takes a really sort of rounded approach at like taking an idea and then looking at it from all angles.
Yeah,
right. And this takes at its. This is basically all built, I think, around two key texts, both from 1968. So you have Arthur C. Clarke, who in 1968 publishes an essay which is the first to sort of coin this notion that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the show sort of goes, the show is like that quote discuss.
Yep.
And that is absolutely what's doing it. And it's right there in that first scene with the Doctor and Joe, where Joe is very much taking the magic is real, it's the age of Aquarius. The Doctor is poo-pooing that and taking a very rationalist stance, which, he sticks to all the way through.
He does. But
everything gets blurry and complicated, and interestingly blurry and complicated. It doesn't. The story does not come down on either side. I mean, ultimately, I think where the story gets to is to say, yes, there may well be dividing lines between science and magic, but to what extent does that matter to all intents and purposes? That's very interestingly comes across in this character of Miss Hawthorne, the White Witch that you've brought out, who is, presented. She's a slight comedy character. She's a bit of a kook. But at the same time, she leaves that
She's
story.
never wrong.
She's never wrong. That's the thing. She'll get through the adventure. Like, she obviously understands everything the Doctor's saying. She's never once in conflict with the Doctor. And yet she will come through that story. And at the end of the story, she has not seen anything that would contradict her beliefs. She leaves that story with the same beliefs that she went into at the start of the story.
True.
And so does the Doctor, in a way. But in a way, the Doctor goes on a slightly weirder journey with it, in that the Doctor, the whole of the first, that first scene in the unit lab where he's being one of those kind of like, I fucking love science kind of meme guys. And at the end, he's sort of forced to admit, as he sort of takes stock of everything that's just happened and then sees the sort of poetry of the unfolding scene around him, the singing of the birds, the beautiful bucolic country village, and he says, well, maybe there is magic in the world after all.
But quite apart from everything else as well, the villain's downfall is to take a kind of desiccated, hyper-rationalist view, right? So the self-sacrifice of Joe to try to save the Doctor.
It's irrationality that saves the day, at least.
Yeah,
and the narrative.
And while you can sort of roll your eyes, it doesn't quite work.
It works thematically.
Yeah, no, I was going to say exactly
dramatically.
I was going to say exactly that. It works perfectly thematically. It doesn't quite land as a plot point when you're watching it, but it works thematically perfectly. I mean, like it's really it's a hop, skip, and a jump from cannot compute, with sort of smoke rising from the robot's ears. So it doesn't. It's a bit too easy. But thematically it works perfectly. And something else is that when the Doctor is sort of abducted by the villagers and tied to the maypole, and they're about to burn him.
Yeah.
I mean, it is properly. I'll come back to that. But like at that point, when he is freed. And he's having a discussion with Miss Hawthorne and about is what's happening magic or is what's happening sort of how does it have a rational side? The rational scientific approach, the rational scientific explanation he gives is that the collective psychic power of everyone, it's just the collective psychic power of all these people being angry. So it's not just that it's indistinguishable from magic. There is literally just the Venn diagram is a circle at that point.
Absolutely. And so to the point, and in the way that we've always talked about the Pertwee era being the sort of dream team of, Barry Letts and Terence Dicks, and then the various other people they're working with, Robert Sloman, Bob Baker, Dave Martin, all of these people who bring a slightly different perspective to the table. By all accounts, Barry Letts wanted to do a story about black magic. It's the master is raising the devil. And Terence Dicks was like, well, no, we can't do that. We have to come up with this rationalist explanation for it. And so they become, the Daemons, who are literally aliens from planet Deimos. But then in framing out that rationalist version of it nicks from the other text from 1968, which I want to mention, which is Erich von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods, which was a best-selling work of, I think, what we would probably generously call pseudoscience, but that is what I don't think he created it, but that's what popularizes this idea that humanity has been visited by aliens who, have interfered with our species all the way through its history.
Yeah.
And it explains.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
But that, that's the explanation for various sort of things that people have put down to, that you can tie together the whole extended universe of British mythology, whether it's religion world mythology, whether it's religion or myth or folklore.
Well, you get
all
that
these
brilliant
kind of
slideshow from the Doctor, where he's, by the way, they're in that heat bubble, where he found those slides of historical representations of the devil. I'm not quite sure, but
I mean, I have a lot of.
But it's a good scene.
I've not read Chariots of the Gods. I've watched the documentary that was made. Well, which came out in 1970.
I love the score by Vangelis, by the way. Sorry.
So the film comes out in 1970. This was written in 1970, shot and broadcast in 1971. So I think it's fair to say people probably went to see the film. And I've not read the book.
What is is it a documentary?
It's a documentary that's an adaptation of the book.
Yeah.
So the book comes out 68, huge seller.
Yeah.
Gets turned into a documentary that gets released in cinemas.
Yeah.
It's sort of bobbins basically, I think a lot of that a lot of the views of it's quite problematic kind of culturally, and I think as one meme put it quite elegantly that was going around on Black Twitter for a while, was like, picture of the pyramid saying just because white people couldn't have built it doesn't mean it had to be aliens, essentially. But that aside, I have sort of quite a lot of affection for that whole sort of idea. But I think it's funny that the sort of rationalist framework that Dix brings to it is pretty much from the most sort of wackadoodle excesses of late 60s, early 70s counterculture. But again, the lines are super blurry. And the fact I love the sort of nod and a wink with how. So the idea is that the Daemons have been performing this sort of long game experiment on humanity, and when the experiments fail, they destroy everything. That's the sort of
that's their MO.
Yeah. That's their MO. And I love how Azal, the main daemon that the Master is sort of in communion with, this giant sort of creature from British folklore, who he summons, says. We Daemons destroy our experiments. Remember Atlantis? And it's like, it's another sort of just cheeky nods to kind of like, all of the stuff that the people buying weird books in the disreputable bookshops would have been. Well, actually, no, the mainstream bookshops, disreputable ones now.
Yeah.
So I love it. I love it as a sort of, again, a little walk through the sort of some of the kind of countercultural ideas that were in the water at the time. But fundamentally, that whole debate at the beginning of it, science or magic, it's like for it to sort of continually, and it's continually wrong-footing it. So at one point, I can't remember what it is, whether it's like one of the Doctor's weapons or something, but basically, so Bok, the gargoyle, who sort of wanders around, at one point, he starts screaming and running away from what's happening. And the Master chastises Bok for saying, like, you should ignore this, like, silly pseudoscientific mumbo-jumbo or something. So
that's right.
The Master is
deriding
the gargoyle come to life for his irrationality, his credulity. But then, how the Master, the Master then is posing as a man of the cloth, but it's but his existentialism is what causes Miss Hawthorne's hackles to rise and think that there might be something on there. It's like everyone, the pieces are moving all the time in such an interesting way that it is really. I find it so elegant with how it sort of it sets up this thesis like. Any form of sufficiently advanced science is indistinguishable from magic. Discuss. And then just attacks that notion from all angles. Yeah, in a way that also, has exploding helicopters and pyros and a giant monster and Stephen Thorne going way over the top in his delivery and Roger Delgado in a priest collar and everything. It's like, it's a bit overlong. It sort of takes a pause midway through episode 3 until episode 5. But it's like, I really have to doff my hat to what it's trying to pull off and what it achieves.
And I think in that sort of, I wouldn't even say it's a debate, but in that discussion about science and magic, like you say, when the dust settles and they're listening to the birds and they sort of consider the trees and all the rest of it, there is a kind of sense that the connective tissue between science and magic is the human experience. It's
Absolutely.
humanity that is the kind of glue that we can experience these rational things magically, even if there isn't.
Which is very Buddhist. Which of course takes us back to Barry Letts.
Yeah.
It's that idea that fundamentally it's experience and consciousness, which is the thing here.
And that's magic. Basically, right? So that is very much of the Barry Letts sort of watermark, I suppose, on this, right? And yet, on top of all of that, there is the master here reminds me a lot. I mean, this is being recorded in October 2024. In the midst of a Conservative Party leadership election, where you've got
we'll know the result by the time this comes out, won't we? Yeah.
Where you've got two, Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, two wannabe populists making out with ideas and values that they probably don't 100% agree with, not realizing the full horror of what that will unleash.
Yeah.
And the master here does very much the same thing. Like, he's trying to manipulate forces. He believes he controls them. And by the way, I mean, this is very much, really sort of overreading, but like, it reminds me a lot of the right-wing Catholic conservative sort of Junker aristocratic class in Germany in the early 30s, who sort of allowed Hitler to become chancellor, thinking, well, he'll get his shot and then it will peter out. We'll control him. We'll use him. And actually, you unleash forces that you're not able to control. Ultimately, the master is not master of his destiny in this thing. He has unleashed a force that's bigger than him. And he's used demagoguery and populism and manipulation and
disinformation, if we want to get all topical on it,
and bluntly force and threats. Like, all of those things are in his arsenal to try and do this. And in the end, he unleashes forces that are beyond him. People, fans of the show will be very familiar with the scene where he's speaking to the villagers on the steps of the squire's house.
Oh God, that's Roger Delgado's best scene.
Oh yeah,
isn't it?
I think
it's just incredible. That
has your wife come back from her sisters? Will she ever come back?
I know
it's really brutal. And
I love the implication as well. The master's really gone in for the long game here. The master must have embedded himself in that community for long enough to really.
I love the fact that he has
get
a go
some low level dirt.
He has a go at the postmaster, saying, "Will the post office's books match up next week or something like?" Of course, the postmaster was later completely exonerated. It was all to do with the Horizon IT system. But no, but in all seriousness, that scene, it speaks to the kind of that evil, twitchy curtain sort of home counties Brexitiness that was very much there then and still exists today. But these people are persuade, but what I love is the squire. So when the Doctor and Joe first arrive at the pub, the squire is a bit sort of blustery, but basically quite friendly, right? And points them in the direction of the barrow and all the rest of it.
And the squire, am I right, is the one watching the broadcast from the pub, sort of saying like, do you think there might be something in this magic thing? He
seems to be kind of all right. But then as soon as the master says to him, listen, mate, you could be in charge here. Like,
and the master really plays to the squire's anti-hippie tendencies as well, doesn't he? That's an amazing scene where he says it's all the stuff about how, we don't need all this freedom and democracy.
Right, exactly. And actually, so there's this particularly British thing of, faced with outsiders or people blah blah blah, very friendly, very nice to their faces, oh, that's actually a nice chap. while slipping a reform ballot into the ballot,
Absolutely,
into the ballot box. It didn't take much to scratch that veneer away and get to the venality that lies beneath. And that collection of tools that the master uses, coercion, misinformation, disinformation, playing to people's sense of grievance, having information held over them using brute force. It's fascistic, very topical as we come up to the US presidential election. But it's, well,
again, we'll know the result. Well, we may not.
We'll know the result by the time this goes out. Well, or yes, indeed, maybe not, depending if it goes to the courts or whatever. But my point is that
hanging Chads strike again. Sorry.
Everything that you have said about the cultural things that this is plugging into are absolutely there. Plus, there's the political overlay.
Yeah.
And yet, beyond all of that, this is a real romp. And there's fisticuffs. And I mean, why Yates and Benton turn up? Why Yates and Benton turn up in their civvies?
I know.
The unit helicopter, for no other reason than just let's give them some nice threads.
Yeah. Leather jacket and some shades.
no good reason at all. But and I agree that some of the pacing is just a little bit off. And the denouement makes more thematic sense than working as a plot point.
Yeah.
But broadly
it's a bit
speaking,
rushed, isn't it?
if we compare this to what we discussed last week, The Five Doctors, where I said, look,
this is our controversial hot take that this is better than The Five Doctors.
But my point is that, when even its greatest fans would say of The Five Doctors, like, no, not the Mind Problem. There are bad performances. There's some crappy sets. There's like the direction of like Liz Sladen falling over her own ankle down a vertiginous cliff that is basically completely horizontal. No love or affection or indeed money has been thrown at the screen.
I know.
And there is no way to stretch out a thematic conversation about that piece of telly.
Yeah.
And then you take this from 12 years earlier, 53 years old, wasn't meant to be looked at half a century or more later, really.
Yeah.
That was never the intention. And here we
Couldn't
are,
have been for a while.
able to, like a drop of Ribena concentrate at the bottom of a glass. Other concentrated juice-based drinks are available,
but not recommended.
But you can pour water and dilute this down and still have a rich, delicious, sweet blackcurrant flavored drink. And it's just amazing that there's so much here for us to unpack. And
I just boggle at the fact that it does it. The science and magic, and we'll come. Science and magic is something I want to talk about in the second part of the show. But that's always a tension in Doctor Who, and this sets its sights laser focused on the heart of that debate, and without ever sort of, at least at this point, sort of compromising the rules of the universe that at least this era of Doctor Who exists in.
Yeah.
Science, action, strategy, all of these kind of things. Like, the thing that impresses me is that it's about science versus magic, but it doesn't look to debunk anything. Do you know what I mean?
No,
it's
but
like,
that's the thing. I don't think it is
complicate.
about
It's
science
not
versus magic. The characters posit this science versus magic thing, but the show's position is actually, let's discuss science and magic.
Yeah.
And what does...
But pull back to the broader canvas.
What does the story we tell each other about what is magic and what is science say about our humanity?
Yeah.
That's what's so good about it.
Can we also talk about the BBC Three stuff?
Yeah. The media stuff.
Which...
on top of everything else we just said,
on top of everything else, because I find this so interesting, because it's and it's a shame considering how sort of slightly later in the show the show is sort of the story is kind of looking for those kind of good scenes. It's a shame that they actually don't keep those characters sticking around for a little longer into it. But it's an amazing sort of meta device that I think does not happen very often in sort of classic Doctor Who, to kind of have this live television broadcast happening, which, we cut to the broadcast several times.
Of course, Russell T Davies
That
lifts that wholesale.
all the time.
I'm not sure he lifts it from the Demons, but he does that.
It's a device that happens a lot in the modern series.
And in modern television, I suppose. But it's
that idea that there is television within television.
It's a mise en abîme.
It took a while, I think, for television in general to acknowledge the existence of television as something that happens in the frame of people's lives.
And I'm sure there are many dads whose kids were watching Doctor Who would have preferred to switch over and see what was happening at Twickenham.
So,
just like Sergeant Benson.
I was sort of going to come on to that, but we'll get to that.
Plays along with being interested in the rugby, but he really wants to watch the dig, doesn't he?
But also, it's so bloody clever that, like, at the start of episode 2, the unit lads are watching the rugby, and they switch over to see a fucking Doctor Who cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Like Joe weeping over the Doctor and going, Doctor, and then it cuts.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, that's got to be the most meta thing that's
what
happened
happens
in
next?
Doctor
Find
Who.
out.
I know.
Call the BBC.
Get over there. What's happening?
They even say, let's call the BBC.
Let's call the BBC. It's so funny. And it's not about that. The whole story is not like a media satire, although, as I say, I could have probably eaten up a bit more of the media satire. But just it's so
not a media satire,
clever.
but that is
so
media
funny.
satire. It is a media satire. And
the fact they turn over to watch a Doctor Who cliffhanger.
But both the presenter and the producer are hungry for how they can get the best out of it in quite a self-serving way. The archaeologist...
That's really funny. Their interaction with I forget his name, but the archaeologist about saying it. And they say, and then you come out and do your spiel, and he says, spiel? It's like,
do. And I suppose you got your book coming out. Got it in one. It's like he's a very hilariously self-serving character as well.
Yeah.
Like he's timed his reveal of what's under there for the live broadcast so that he can sell his tie-in book, which I guess comes back to what you were saying about Chariots of the Gods.
Chariots of the Gods.
Yeah. Like, he's got his tie-in book about what this all means and all that sort of stuff.
Some theories.
Yeah, exactly. So it's that's, I think that whole thing is lightly ribbed for extra pleasure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I love that too. I also want to talk about just how funny some of this stuff is.
Yeah.
Like one of the best laughs in Doctor Who in its 60-year run is that final bit where Yates invites the Brigadier to dance. It's a very kind offer of you. I think I prefer a pint.
For a pint, rather a pint.
Yeah, and they both sort of and then toddle off to the pub, and it's just like it just makes you chuckle with how at home you are with these characters and how at home they are with each other. They want to be there.
And that
they know each other's
which
place.
Again, I don't know if that's a crane shot or presumably they put a camera like up in one of the
of
the buildings.
It's elegant.
Nearby. It's really elegant, and it just because this is the last thing you're going to see all season. Until Doctor Who comes back later. So let's just linger on this moment of the characters. Just getting to play for a bit now, which we rarely get to see them do.
Yeah.
Like if we do, it's always at the start of the story, and it's all going to get disrupted later by what's going on. So let's just see them all take a breath out at the end, and to hold on that wide shot, it's a really lovely moment.
I also we've touched on this a few times when we've seen her, but Jo Grant's character is not played for I think the folk memory of her is that she's just a ditz, right? But the sacrifice that, and I know we said, well, in plot terms, it's a bit shonky. Thematically, it works. But the way that she stands in front of the Doctor to save him, he is more important. He matters so much to her that she will do it. That's not the action of some flower child, ditzy, kind of airheaded weirdo. It's the action of a brave person with principles,
and I think that contrast
stands their ground.
That contrast is being drawn really consciously by the fact that they've got her in the sacrifice garb at the moment, that sort of white dress, which is very sort of blood on Satan's claw, kind of hammer.
Yeah,
hammer, blonde, about to be
hammer erotica kind of.
Exactly,
Yeah.
It's very coded with that. Yeah. So again, the fact that she, doesn't really hold together. But the fact that she's able to sort of overcome that coding and sort of save the day at that point is
no, because the thing is,
I think.
That garb that she's in is about her being sacrificed by men, whereas in this case she is sacrificing herself, and that's very different in terms of where the agency lies, right? Yeah. So she takes back control of the situation there completely, and she emerges as the strongest of the characters in that room in that moment.
Yeah. I also just want to talk. I mean, we mentioned her briefly earlier, but Miss Hawthorne, so Olive Hawthorne, the White Witch, is in that sort of lineage of characters from Doctor Who that I think...
Damaris Heyman.
Yes. I think she... We sort of rarely discuss these as kind of character archetypes in Doctor Who. Go on.
Sorry, in Wikipedia, she died only very recently. She had a good innings. 91 she was. She died in 2021. She's described in the initial Wikipedia blurb as someone who was often cast in upper class or eccentric roles.
Yeah.
So
no shit.
They nailed it, basically.
Yeah. But she's in that lineage of characters that I think, we never think of them as like a Doctor Who archetype, but we always enjoy them when they come along. A bit like the guy who's running the holiday camp in Delta and the Bannermen.
Right.
Just like people who enjoy being along for the adventure, rather than, like, and obviously, in a way, she sort of forms a bit of a counterpoint to the Doctor in this, in that they're all basically drawing the same conclusions to what happened. They're both drawing the same conclusions, but just putting the emphasis slightly differently. But also, there's just a sense that although she is raising the alarm about the return of the devil, she contributes to this sort of romp feeling. Like, I love the bit where, she's even got a crystal ball in her bag, but she uses it to knock someone out at the end. She's
and
I hit him with my reticule.
I can't remember the exact words, but she says you don't need any foresight to see what's going to happen.
The outcome's a certainty.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is really funny.
Yeah,
it's
very
another
funny.
Good joke.
And again, it's not like she's said something accidentally. Like, she's absolutely has the agency in making that joke. She knows
be funny.
Yeah, exactly.
To tell jokes.
No, she's great. I completely agree. And I really, again, she's happy to be along for the ride. She's happy to be along for the ride. The Doctor and Joe are happy to be along for the ride. The unit crew are happy to be along for the ride. When you are casting an ensemble, there is obviously creative tension for one of them being dissatisfied at any given moment.
Yeah.
But there is not a lot to be gained from them just being at each other's throats, or clearly that their entire character is, I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
Which is where, to go back to the Five Doctors, the contemporary TARDIS crew finds itself there.
Yeah.
This is a fertile ground. The ensemble they've built and the setup and the kind of the high concept that they've arrived at provides a fertile ground for all these ideas to emerge at the same time as just delivering you, pyrotechnics and a chopper and all the rest of it. The fact that it can sustain this level of scrutiny after all this time and still just be a fun bit of telly is quite extraordinary. And it makes me glad that we're doing this podcast, because if it were just pastel shade mediocrity every week, I would wonder why we're doing this. But then you see this and you go, God, this show's amazing.
Chariots of the Gods, the international bestseller by Erich von Daniken that shattered conventional theories about history and archaeology. Now Sun International brings it to the screen in a startling new film. Chariots of the Gods explores von Daniken's controversial and explosive theory that beings from other galaxies visited Earth in ancient times. Did a genius from another world design the pyramids? Is there evidence of a prehistoric airfield in the Andes? And what about the giant stone faces that brood over Easter Island? All over the Earth, the evidence is there. For an intriguing, fascinating, mind-opening experience, see Chariots of the Gods, rated G.
So, I want to talk a bit more about...
Really? Sorry.
It's just hard edit there. I want to talk a bit more.
It's been a lovely evening. Thank you very much.
What are your less interesting views about the Daemons? No, just this idea of magic in Doctor Who. So Barry Letts's starting point for this was...
The real magic is the writing. Sorry, go on.
It's the indefinable magic that keeps us coming back to it at least 60 years later. Barry Letts's original idea for the Daemons was, it's a black magic episode. That's plan A. The idea that they're aliens is very much plan B. And it's quite striking, by the way, when the first time the Master does the kind of invocation, I was thinking to myself, like, he's saying Dark One, Devil, kind of. That would literally create tabloid headlines now. Like, it's something that feels more risque now than it was then. There'd be a moral panic. Someone would create a moral panic about that these days. I'm not sure where this exists in the sort of lineage of the sort of periodic satanic panics that we kind of go through. But I know what you're saying. Although, again, it's interesting that in the Satan pit, there is they bring in the devil, and I think that's been a while since I've watched that. Does that provide a sort of rationalist framework? But anyway, it's like there have been Doctor Who sort of generally exists in kind of rationalist science forward kind of mode. It takes these sort of dips into magic, and I think very successfully here. I think it's something that the show has done very consciously in the first Ncuti Gatwa series
and the 60th anniversary specials,
and the 60th anniversary specials, actually,
particularly the giggle. Yeah,
well, this whole idea of like reintroducing the toy maker as one of these pantheons of gods who the theory, at least, and we'll discuss the spoilers. I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I think it's like we'll discuss how well this idea plays out. But the idea that like you have magic that like the dramatic impact of this is that it doesn't play by any rules. We're off into new territory. Do you like your Doctor Who cut with magic?
It's a really good question, because if you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, I'd have said no.
Yeah.
Definitely not. And as I've...
You're quite a fantasy fan. You've got a bigger tolerance for like your Lords of the Rings and your Game of Throneses and things than I do.
Yeah, Games of Thrones.
Games of Thrones.
Attorneys General, Games of Thrones. No, I suppose I do, but I think if you'd asked me sort of 10 years ago or so, I would have said, yes, but I like the fantasy to stay as fantasy, and I like the science fiction to stay as science fiction. And I think that...
And we have been critical of Doctor Who that's code switch. I think Moffat pulls that trick a few times, doesn't he? To disappointing effect of setting up a sort of rationalist puzzle box and then saying, actually, no, it's just faith and love that make everything happen.
Yeah, but I think that's... What I've come to realise is...
Sorry, I'll let you finish.
No. But I think you're making completely... Like, all science fiction that... Like Star Trek: The Next Generation is in a very, very rationalist framework, right? It's philosophical framework, and Star Trek: The Next Generation is one, like, it's right up there with Doctor Who in my top tier. If I am ill, if I am tired, if I am upset, I want to watch an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. It's my comfort blanket.
God, what a nerd!
Yeah, I know, right?
Bloody anorak.
I know.
Yeah,
but obviously seasons 3 through 7 though. No, but I love that show, and I would love what they called on the program the techno babble, you know, which is basically, just reverse the polarity, dear boy. But what I have come to realize over the last 10 years is that functionally, actually, all science fiction, all popular science fiction, even if it codes itself dramatically as scientifically based, is fantasy.
Yeah.
Like, the TARDIS is a box that is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. If that's not magic, what is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, someone will say, oh no, there's a perfectly rational explanation, but there isn't, and that's not really conceivable within our sense of what is possible within the physical laws that we can manipulate.
Yeah.
Right. So there is in many ways less of a boundary between, but what it is about is the dramatic intent. Right.
Yeah.
It's about what is the authorial intent, what is the writer's view of this, and does it make internally coherent sense?
Yeah.
So in the Demons, because they, as you have said, right up front, introduce the question of magic and science, then you are on a footing to accept both as part of the adventure.
Yeah.
What I think Moffat sometimes is guilty of, and also where other shows and other Doctor Who serials and other writers go wrong, is that they've coded something very specifically as science-y. But then there's a kind of magic wand solution. So
actually, Davis does that a hell of a lot.
God, I mean, if you think about Last of the Time Lords,
exactly
great example.
Parting of the Ways, really.
Yes, but also what's the one where Pond remembers the Doctor and so he comes back?
Oh yeah, it's Pandorica.
Yeah, right.
Big Bang. Yeah,
and that whole, there's loads of it that's in the museum with the fairs and all the rest of it. That's this is a time travel puzzle box.
Yeah.
And it's intricate, and there's a rational explanation for everything. So it seems like it's impossible, but there's a rational explanation. And then it completely undercuts that and goes, nah, it's all right. She remembers him. He comes back. And so it kind of, you get that rug pull. So as I've got older, I find that it's less that I'm not wanting to see magic in Doctor Who, or that I'm concerned about the boundaries. It's really more about whether I feel the writer has managed to create internal logic within the story that allows you to suspend your disbelief.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you on that. I think also, it's interesting. I think there's a limiting factor. You're absolutely right to raise the TARDIS, really, as an example. You know, the magic time traveling box that's bigger on the inside of the out.
Yeah,
that's also, in a way, a kind of...
And in New Who, the sonic screwdriver is a wand.
Exactly. That's a kind of limiter, really, on also how hard sci-fi the show can go, because it's like, how in the way that, I think at least Star Trek, I mean, yes, the technobabble is essentially magic, but there's this idea that even if the rules are made up rules, there's a kind of rationalism that this all sort of
it's within a rational framework.
Yeah, whereas like there's a sort of
it allows you to suspend your disbelief. Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. It's about the world they've created, the writers, the producers. They've created a world where you can suspend your disbelief into that. What they're saying is nonsense, but what they're saying is this is a rational world.
Right. And it's actually, a lot of it is sort of, a lot of the really productive times those things come into tension are where there's something interesting in having those aspects play off against each other. So I'm also thinking of Blink, which is something that, obviously we watched that a few weeks ago and sort of praised it to the heights, which is about essentially saying magic time traveling box nonsense, but let's really grind out. If we were to take this as real, let's really grind out the logical consequences of how this would work and make it fit together very satisfying.
Which having just taken a big, massive, rather loose and tummy bug fueled dump on Stephen Moffat.
Yeah.
Let's give credit where it's due.
When he walks that tightrope, which he does, he's more interested in all of that stuff. Like,
Day of the Doctor is another good example. Like, when slices of time are caught in a picture, that feels much more fantasy coded than a real piece of science, right? It just feels more fantasy.
Yeah.
So I think Day of the Doctor is a good example of that as well.
It's also, maybe a good place to close this out would be just to bring back an old quote from William Hartnell, who sort of given an interview. I can't remember if it was after he left the series or whether it was sort of when he was, approaching or being ushered towards the exit. And he, the producers, I think it was John Wiles who came in after Verity Lambert wanted to introduce sort of more hard science fiction concepts to the show. And Hartnell kind of pushed back up against that quite a lot, saying that like they keep giving Doctor Who all of these sort of long scientific speeches. The point is that Doctor Who is not a scientist; he's a wizard. And I think it's like, okay, it's William Hartnell, the original.
The original.
To quote Richard Hurndall, you might say.
Yeah.
There you go. You can't take a more unimpeachable source than that. But anyway, that's enough of what we think. Let us know what you think. Do you like?
I mean, you don't have to let us know,
to.
but if you want to, we will certainly pretend to have read them next week. But in all seriousness,
I always love moderating comments.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe
on the YouTube.
Don't forget to like and subscribe to the official. I'll explain it. Yeah, we still haven't got it together to record one of those. But yeah, leave us a comment below. Send a message on Blue Sky. I'll explain later. Message us Twitter and Instagram. Explain later pod. Email hello@illexplainlater.com. Yeah, you see.
I don't get to do my snarky sotto voce.
I'm sorry. We'll be back next week with more Doctor Who for mainly your ears, your eyes if you're watching.
Yeah.
It's all petered out. But anyway, that's all from us this week.
It is.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.